The rain had not stopped since morning, and Eleanor Hartley had long ago given up expecting it to matter to anyone but herself. She stood at the edge of the drawing room at Ashcombe Manor, half hidden behind the velvet drapery, watching her cousin Cecilia rehearse her laugh in the reflection of a darkened window. It was a beautiful laugh, practiced to fall just so, light and musical, the kind of laugh meant to be overheard by a duke. Eleanor had heard it 100 times that week alone. She had stopped counting how many times she had heard her own name spoken with impatience instead. "Eleanor, the flowers in the blue room have wilted again. See to it. Eleanor, tell cook the fish course must be delayed until 6:30. Eleanor, do try not to be seen when the carriages arrive." That last instruction, delivered by her aunt Lady Vane with the same brisk indifference she might use to order a servant to sweep ash from a hearth, had settled into Eleanor's chest like a stone. She was 23, unmarried, dependent, and, by her aunt's estimation, ornamental only in her usefulness. She was not to be seen. She understood this. She had understood it since she was 12 years old, and her parents had died within a season of each other, leaving her to the charity of relations who measured charity carefully, like flour in a famine. She did not resent Cecilia, not truly. Her cousin was lovely, in the way spoiled things are lovely, glossy and untested. But sometimes, in quiet moments, Eleanor allowed herself to imagine what it might be to be looked at, rather than looked past. It was a small, shameful longing, and she kept it folded away, the way she kept the single miniature portrait of her mother at the bottom of her trunk. Tonight, the imagining felt sharper than usual, because tonight the Duke of Rothmere was expected. The rumor had swept through the county for a fortnight. He was young, unmarried, immensely wealthy, and, more precious than any of these things to a family drowning quietly in debt, he was said to be considering a match. Sir Reginald Vane, Eleanor's uncle, had spent 3 days in a fever of hospitality, ordering the stables mucked twice over and the good silver counted and recounted. Lady Vane had spent the same 3 days transforming Cecilia into something she hoped would catch a duke's eye and hold it. No one had asked what Eleanor thought of any of it. No one ever did. She was not envious. She told herself this firmly, several times, as she straightened the last crooked painting in the hall and listened to the wheels of the first carriage crunch against wet gravel. She was only tired, and a little cold, and perhaps, though she would not have said so aloud, a little curious what a duke looked like up close, whether wealth truly changed the shape of a man's face, the way people seemed to believe. She would learn the answer sooner than she expected, and in a manner she could not have imagined. For the man who stepped down from the second, plainer carriage that evening, the one that arrived a full quarter hour after the grand equipage bearing a golden-haired gentleman introduced with great ceremony as His Grace, the Duke of Rothmere, was not announced at all. He simply appeared at the edge of the stable-yard, in a dark greatcoat, unremarkable boots, and an expression of quiet, careful watching, as though he had been sent ahead to catalogue the household, rather than be received by it. Eleanor, sent out with an umbrella she had been scolded into fetching, very nearly walked past him without a second glance. It was the sound of the horses shying at a crack of thunder that made her stop, made her see him step forward instinctively to steady the frightened leader, murmuring something low and calm to the animal before any groom could reach it. "You've a gentle hand with him," she said, before she thought better of speaking to a stranger at all. He looked at her then, properly, for the first time. His eyes were a grey so pale they seemed lit from within, and there was something searching in them, something that made her feel, absurdly, as though she had been asked a question she had not yet answered. "He does not like being told what to fear," the man said, "only shown that there is nothing to fear in the first place." It was, Eleanor would think later, an unusually thoughtful thing for a secretary to say. But she did not think it strange at the time. She thought only that his voice was low and even, and that he had not once glanced toward the house to see whether anyone of consequence was watching him behave kindly, which was, in her limited experience of gentlemen's servants, rather unusual in itself. "You must be new to the Duke's household," she said, holding the umbrella a little higher so the rain would not catch his collar. "I don't believe I've seen you before." "I am new to a great many things," he said, and something flickered behind his careful expression. Amusement, perhaps, or its more guarded cousin, Alden Grey. "I have the honor of managing His Grace's correspondence and other tiresome affairs. Eleanor Hartley." She dropped a small, unthinking curtsy, the kind one gives to anyone met properly, regardless of station, a habit her mother had taught her long before poverty had taught her that stations mattered a great deal to everyone else. "I hope the roads were not too dreadful. We've had nothing but rain since Tuesday." "The roads were tolerable," he said. "The company promises to be considerably more interesting." She laughed before she could stop herself. A real laugh, unpracticed, entirely unlike Cecilia's careful music. "I shouldn't get your hopes up on that account, Mr. Grey. We are a very ordinary household. I have found," he said, with the ghost of a smile, "that ordinary households often contain the most extraordinary things, if one troubles to look." He bowed, briefly, and turned to attend to some matter of luggage, and Eleanor went back into the house with rain on her shoulders and an odd, warm confusion in her chest that she did not examine too closely, because examining it felt dangerous, the way standing too near a cliff's edge felt dangerous, even when one had no intention of jumping. She did not know, could not have known, that the man she had just called a secretary was in fact Gabriel Ashworth, 9th Duke of Rothmere, and that the golden-haired gentleman receiving all the bows and curtsies in the drawing-room at that very moment was his oldest friend, Julian Farrow, playing a part they had agreed upon 3 days before, for reasons Gabriel had not fully explained even to himself. He had told Julian it was caution. A man in his position could not simply appear in a house full of marriageable daughters and expect to see anyone's true face, only the face arranged for a duke's benefit, powdered and rehearsed, and utterly false. He wanted, just once, to walk into a room as no one at all, and see what a family did when they believed there was nothing to be gained from him. He had not told Julian the rest of it, that 2 years ago a woman named Lady Rosalind Ainsworth had promised him her heart and then married a baronet with a larger income within a month of a false rumor that Rothmere's fortune had collapsed. He had not told anyone how thoroughly that had taught him to distrust the particular warmth in a woman's eyes when she learned his title, how he had come, since then, to test that warmth before he trusted it, the way a man tests ice before he commits his full weight to it. He had expected, walking up that drive in the rain, to find at Ashcombe Manor precisely what he found in every house he visited under his own name: vanity, dressed as virtue, ambition, dressed as affection. He had not expected a young woman with rain-damp shoulders and unguarded eyes to hold an umbrella over a stranger's head and laugh, truly laugh, at nothing more than an ordinary jest. He found, standing in the corridor afterward listening to Lady Vane's voice rise in false delight over His Grace's every word, that he was already looking forward to seeing Miss Hartley again, and telling himself, not entirely convincingly, that it was simple curiosity and nothing more. Dinner that first evening was, Eleanor thought, a kind of theatre she had watched too many times to find entertaining. Cecilia was seated as near to the Duke as propriety allowed, her laugh deployed at intervals precisely calculated to seem spontaneous. Lady Vane steered every conversation toward Rothmere's estates, his horses, his London house, with the delicate persistence of a woman circling a target she dared not name outright. Sir Reginald drank rather more claret than was wise, and spoke too loudly of alliances between old families, until his wife's sharp glance silenced him. Eleanor was seated, as she always was, at the lower end of the table, near enough to be useful and far enough to be forgotten. It suited her. From that vantage, she could watch without being watched, a small mercy she had learned to value. It was there she noticed that the golden-haired Duke laughed a beat too late at his own jokes, as though reciting lines rather than living them, and that his gaze drifted, more than once, toward the quiet man seated near the foot of the table, the secretary, Mr. Gray, as if seeking some silent permission or correction. She thought nothing of it, beyond a vague, idle curiosity. Servants and their masters had their private signals. It was not her business to read them. She did notice, because she could not help noticing, that Mr. Gray ate sparingly, spoke little, and watched everything, not with the blank patience of a man enduring a tedious evening, but with the close attention of someone memorizing a room. Once, when Cecilia's laugh rang out particularly bright over some remark of the Duke's, Eleanor caught Mr. Gray's eye by accident across the length of the table, and for just a moment something passed between them. Not flirtation, not quite, but a shared and silent understanding, as if he too found the performance a little absurd, and was glad, briefly, of someone else who saw it as such. She looked away first, cheeks warm, and told herself it meant nothing. After dinner, while the ladies withdrew and the gentlemen lingered over their port, Eleanor slipped out to the kitchen garden for air, as she often did when the house grew too loud with things that were not meant for her. The rain had eased into mist. She found, to her surprise, that she was not alone. Mr. Gray stood near the old stone wall, looking up at the black shapes of the yew trees against a clouded moon, his greatcoat collar turned up against the damp. "Forgive me," she said. "I didn't know anyone else had escaped." "Escaped is precisely the word," he said, and there was real warmth in it now, unguarded. The careful watchfulness of the dinner table softened into something more human. "I confess, I find these gatherings rather exhausting to observe." "Then you have my sympathy. I find them exhausting to attend." She wrapped her shawl tighter. "Though I don't suppose your evenings are usually so grand, Mr. Gray, managing a duke's letters can't often bring you to houses like this." "You would be surprised what my position brings me to," he said, and there was something wry in it, something she couldn't quite place. "May I ask you something, Miss Hartley?" "You may ask. I make no promise of a satisfying answer." "Do you enjoy it? All of this?" He gestured vaguely toward the lit windows behind them, the muffled sound of laughter within. "The visits, the dinners, the arrangements being made." She considered lying, the way politeness generally required. Instead, for reasons she could not have named, except that something in his stillness invited honesty, she told him the truth. "No," she said simply. "I find I am mostly furniture at such gatherings, Mr. Gray. Useful, occasionally moved about, never consulted on where I ought to stand." She heard the bitterness in her own voice and softened it with a small, rueful laugh. "That sounds terribly ungrateful. My aunt and uncle have given me a home. I ought not to complain of my place in it." "You are permitted," he said quietly, "to notice that a thing is unkind, even if it is also, in its way, a kindness." She looked at him properly then, in the pale wash of moonlight, and found something in his face she had not expected from a secretary. Not pity, which she could not have borne, but a kind of grave respect, as though her small honest confession had cost her something, and he understood the cost. "You are a strange sort of secretary, Mr. Gray," she said softly. "So I have been told," he said, and there was, again, that flicker of private amusement she did not yet know enough to interpret. "Good night, Miss Hartley. I hope the rain lets up by morning, for your sake as much as the horses." He bowed and left her there among the wet hedges, her heart doing something quick and unfamiliar in her chest, a small warm ember she would spend the rest of the night trying, unsuccessfully, to talk herself out of feeling. The days that followed fell into an unlikely rhythm. By morning, the household orbited around the Duke, riding parties arranged for his amusement, musical evenings staged for his approval, Cecilia's gowns chosen with an eye to what might please him. By the quieter hours of afternoon, when Cecilia napped or fussed over her toilette, and Lady Vane occupied herself with correspondence designed to spread news of the match she was already certain of, Eleanor found herself, again and again, in the company of Mr. Gray. It began, she told herself, entirely by accident. She had gone to the library to fetch a book for her uncle, and found the secretary there, several days into the visit, examining the spines of old volumes, with the unhurried attention of a man who genuinely loved books, rather than merely tolerating them as furnishings. "You've found the one room in this house no one else visits," she said. "I noticed that at once," he said, without turning. "A house reveals a great deal in the rooms it neglects. You are very fond of observing houses, Mr. Gray. An occupational habit." He turned then, holding out a slim volume of poetry, worn soft at the corners. "Do you know this one?" She did. It had been her father's. Before her father's books had all been sold to settle debts she'd been too young to understand, and seeing a twin of it in a stranger's hands sent a small ache through her that she had not expected. "My father used to read from it," she said, before she could decide whether to say so at all. "In the evenings, before," she stopped. "Before he died," Mr. Gray said gently, not a question. "Yes." She looked at the book rather than at him, because it was easier. "I don't often speak of it. My aunt finds it indelicate to dwell on grief in company." "Grief is not indelicate," he said, with a quiet firmness that surprised her. "It is only inconvenient to those who have never properly felt it themselves." She looked up at that, startled, and found him watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch, though she could not have said why. It was not desire, not exactly, or not only that. It was closer to recognition, as though he had been searching a great many rooms for a particular face, and had, unexpectedly, found it in hers. "You speak," she said slowly, "like a man who has grieved something himself." Something shuttered briefly behind his eyes. "Everyone has," he said, and offered her the book instead of an answer, and she understood, without quite knowing how, that she had touched some private wound she was not yet permitted to see the shape of. She took the book. Their fingers brushed. Neither of them mentioned it, though both of them noticed. It became their habit after that to find each other in the library's quiet hour, or along the garden path where the old roses grew wild and untended, or once, memorably, in the small chapel at the edge of the estate, where Eleanor had gone to lay flowers on the modest grave of an old nurse who had been kind to her as a child, and found Mr. Gray already there, sitting quietly in the last pew, as though the stillness of the place called to something in him too. "I did not take you for a religious man," she said. "I am not, particularly," he admitted. "I come here for the quiet. It is rare, where I generally find myself." "A duke's household must never be quiet," she said, sitting beside him without quite deciding to. "All that consequence, rattling about. You have no idea," he murmured, and there was an edge to it that made her glance at him curiously, though he offered nothing further, and she did not press. It was there, in the chapel, that she told him, haltingly, in pieces, the way one tells a thing one has never said whole before, about her parents' deaths, her uncle's grudging charity, the years of being useful without being wanted, the particular loneliness of being raised alongside a cousin who was loved for simply existing, while she herself had to earn her supper with obedience. "I am not unhappy," she said finally, fiercely, as though daring him to contradict her. "I have a roof, and food, and I am not cruel to anyone, and that must count for something." "It counts for everything," he said quietly. "But it is not the same as being happy, Miss Hartley, and I think you know that better than you allow yourself to say." She had no answer for that. She only sat very still, aware of how close he was, of the low, steady warmth of his voice, of the strange fact that she had told a duke's secretary more of her true heart in a fortnight than she had told her own family in 11 years. She did not yet know how much more dangerous it was than it seemed, that the man beside her was not observing her out of idle sympathy, but out of a growing, unwilling tenderness he had not permitted himself to feel for anyone in 2 long years, and that every honest word she gave him was tightening a knot around his own heart that he was no longer entirely certain he wished to escape. Gabriel Ashworth had begun the visit with a simple design: watch and be unmoved. He had watched Julian perform his role admirably, receiving Cecilia Vane's calculated attentions with the polished patience of a man used to being courted for his title rather than himself, and reporting back each evening with some amusement, on Lady Vane's increasingly transparent maneuvers. "She asked me today," Julian told him one night, sprawled in the chair of the small chamber they shared, under pretense of master and servant, sleeping in adjoining rooms, whether I preferred a large family seat or a townhouse for the winter months, and then, without any transition whatsoever, whether Cecilia's colouring would suit better in blue or gold. "I begin to feel less a suitor than a piece of upholstery being fitted for a drawing room." "You are bearing it admirably," Gabriel said, only half listening, his mind elsewhere. In a chapel, on a garden path, in the particular way Eleanor Hartley's voice softened when she spoke of her father. Julian studied him with the shrewd affection of a man who had known him since Eton. "You are not attending to a word I say. I am attending. You are attending to Miss Hartley," Julian said, "which is a different occupation altogether, and one you did not undertake this charade to pursue." Gabriel did not deny it, which was in itself an answer. "Gabriel," Julian's voice lost its teasing edge, "you know how this ends, don't you? Sooner or later the truth comes out. It always does. And when it does, that girl will learn that every honest word she has given a poor secretary these past 2 weeks was in fact given to a duke who let her believe otherwise. Women do not, in my experience, thank a man for that particular kindness." "I did not set out to deceive her," Gabriel said, low. "No," Julian agreed. "You set out to deceive an entire household, and she happened to be standing in the middle of it when the deception began. I do not say you meant her harm. I say the harm will land on her regardless of what you meant." It was not a comfortable truth, and Gabriel turned from it the way a man turns from a fire too hot to approach directly, telling himself there was time yet, a few more days, a few more honest conversations, before he need face what Julian had already seen clearly. He did not yet understand how little time remained. The trouble began, as such troubles often do, with a letter. It arrived for Sir Reginald on a grey Thursday morning, brought by a rider who had come some distance and asked to be paid before he would relinquish it, a demand that told Eleanor, listening from the hall where she had been sent with the morning's mending, everything she needed to know about its contents before her uncle had even broken the seal. She heard, through the half-open study door, her uncle's voice crack with something between panic and fury. £3,000. He wants £3,000 by Michaelmas, or he forecloses the whole northern parcel. "Lower your voice," Lady Vane hissed. "Do you wish the whole house to hear you ruined?" "I wish," Sir Reginald said, with the particular bitterness of a proud man cornered, "that this cursed duke would make his offer for Cecilia before we are none of us left with a roof to receive him under." Eleanor stood very still in the hall, the mending forgotten in her hands, and understood at last the full shape of what she had half sensed since the visit began, that this was not merely a matter of a fortunate match for her cousin, but a rescue, urgently needed, upon which the whole family's survival now openly depended. She understood, too, with a small cold drop in her stomach, precisely how little room such urgency left for anything as inconvenient as her own quiet, growing feelings for a secretary who could offer the family nothing at all. She said nothing of what she had overheard. But something in her sharpened after that morning, a wariness she had not felt before, a sense of watching her own heart the way one watches a candle near dry rushes. It did not stop her, 3 evenings later, from finding herself once more in Mr. Gray's company, this time in the music room, where she had gone to practice alone, believing the house occupied elsewhere. She was halfway through a piece her mother had taught her, faltering over a passage she had never quite mastered, when she became aware of him standing in the doorway, listening. "Don't stop," he said, when she startled and lifted her hands from the keys. "Please." "It is not very good," she said, embarrassed. "It is honest," he said. "Which is rarer and better than good." She played on, self-conscious at first and then, gradually, forgetting him entirely in the music, until the piece ended and the room fell quiet around them, and she looked up to find him closer than she had realized, his expression unguarded in a way she had not yet seen it. "Miss Hartley," he said, and something in his voice made her heart quicken. "I find that I think of you a great deal more than a man in my position ought to allow himself." She should have laughed it off, should have reminded them both, gently, of the vast gulf between a poor companion and a duke's secretary, a gulf that made even this much honesty a kind of recklessness. Instead, she found herself saying, very quietly, "I think of you too, Mr. Grey, rather more than I ought." He stepped closer. For one suspended moment she thought, hoped, feared, that he might close the distance entirely, and something in her leaned toward that possibility, even as every rule she had been raised on warned her back from it. It was the sound of Cecilia's voice in the corridor, bright and careless, that broke the moment before either of them could act on it. Eleanor stepped back, cheeks flaming, and Mr. Grey's face resumed, almost instantly, the careful neutrality of a servant caught somewhere he ought not linger. "Good night, Miss Hartley," he said, low, and was gone before Cecilia entered, humming, entirely unaware of what she had interrupted. Eleanor sat very still at the pianoforte for a long while after, her hands trembling faintly in her lap, torn between the warm, dangerous joy of what had nearly been said and the cold certainty that nothing could come of it, that a secretary, however kind, however searching his grey eyes, could not save her from the quiet erasure that was her likely future, and that she was a fool, a complete fool, to let herself want more than her situation could ever grant her. She did not yet know that the very thing she believed impossible was, in fact, already closer to true than she could have dreamed, and that the danger she sensed was real, but not for the reason she imagined. The masquerade held longer than either Gabriel or Julian had anticipated, in part because Lady Vane's schemes accelerated faster than either man had accounted for. It was announced, 3 days later, over a breakfast heavy with false cheer, that a ball would be held at Ashcombe Manor at the week's end, ostensibly to honour the neighbourhood, in truth to force the Duke's hand before Michaelmas and its ruinous deadline arrived. Lady Vane spoke of the ball with the bright, brittle determination of a woman staking everything on a single throw of dice, and Eleanor, watching her aunt's hands shake very slightly as she gave instructions to the housekeeper, felt an unexpected and unwelcome pity beneath her own private dread. She was given for the ball her aunt's discarded gown from 2 seasons past, taken in hastily and without much care, in a shade of grey that flattered no one. It did not matter. She had not expected to be looked at. She had not expected either the particular ache of watching Cecilia prepare, the new silk, the careful arrangement of curls, the practiced smile rehearsed one final time before the glass, and knowing that whatever passed between herself and Mr. Grey in quiet corners of the house, this ball belonged, by every law that governed their world, to her cousin and the golden-haired man everyone believed to be a duke. She resolved, dressing in the grey gown with hands that would not quite steady, that she would be sensible that night. She would smile, and curtsy where required, and not seek out Mr. Grey at all, because seeking him out could lead only to a hope she had no right to hold, and hope, she had learned early and thoroughly, was a luxury poor relations could not afford. Her resolve lasted almost the length of the first 2 dances. She was standing near the edge of the ballroom, half in shadow, watching the candlelight catch on gowns far finer than her own, when she became aware of him at her side, not the golden-haired Duke, resplendent in the centre of the room with Cecilia on his arm, but Mr. Grey, in a coat rather finer than she had yet seen him wear, standing very still, watching her the way he always watched her, as though she were the only thing in the room worth the trouble of seeing clearly. "You are not dancing, Miss Hartley," he said. "Companions rarely are, Mr. Grey. It is considered forward." "Then let us be forward," he said, and held out his hand, and something reckless in her, something that had been folded away and quiet for 11 long years, reached out and took it before caution could catch up. They danced. It was, she would remember afterward, the finest 3 minutes of her adult life. His hand light and sure at her waist, his eyes never once leaving hers, the candlelight and the music, and the low murmur of the room, falling away, until there was only the two of them, moving together as though they had always known how. She did not see Lady Vane's gaze sharpen upon them from across the room. She did not see the whisper pass, swift and ugly, from one guest to another, the poor cousin, dancing with the Duke's own secretary, as though she believed herself entitled to such attention. She saw only him, and for those 3 minutes, she allowed herself, foolishly and completely, to believe that it might be enough, simply to be seen. It was not until the dance ended, and he bowed over her hand a beat longer than propriety strictly required, that she caught her aunt's expression across the room, not merely disapproving, but calculating, cold, already turning some new plan over in her mind, and felt the first cold thread of dread work its way through her happiness. She did not yet know how quickly that dread would prove justified, nor how completely the ground beneath her small, stolen joy was about to give way. Lady Vane found her within the hour, in the corridor outside the ladies' retiring room, her voice pitched low and furious. "Have you entirely lost your senses? Dancing with a servant, before half the county, while your cousin's future hangs in the balance?" "He is not merely a servant," Eleanor began, though she could not have said precisely what she believed him to be instead. "He is precisely a servant, and you are precisely a fool if you imagine anything else." Lady Vane's grip tightened on her arm. "Do you understand what is at stake this week? Your uncle's estate, this roof, Cecilia's entire future, and yes, Eleanor, yours as well. For where do you imagine you go if this house is lost? You will make no further spectacle of yourself with that man, or I will see you sent to your great-aunt in Yorkshire before the month is out, companion to a woman who has buried 3 husbands and outlived her patience for young women entirely. Do I make myself understood?" Eleanor understood. She understood with the particular clarity of a woman who has just glimpsed, very suddenly, the full cliff edge of her situation, that her aunt's charity had always been conditional, that her small, stolen happiness that evening had cost more than she'd realized, and that the price of continuing to want what she wanted might well be exile from the only home, however cold, that she had. She returned to the ballroom with her composure carefully reassembled, and did not seek out Mr. Grey again that night, though she felt his gaze find her more than once across the crowded room, questioning, and she made herself look away each time, because she did not trust her own face to hide what looking at him honestly would show. It was near midnight, as the ball was winding toward its close, and half the guests had retired to the card room, that the second blow fell, swifter and colder than the first. She had gone to fetch her aunt's shawl from the small study where the coats and wraps had been laid, and found the door already ajar, voices within. Julian Farrow's voice, low and urgent, unmistakably his own, though it took her a moment to place why hearing it should feel strange. "Cannot keep this up much longer, Gabriel. The whole business grows more dangerous by the day, and you know as well as I that Lady Vane already suspects something is amiss with the arrangement." Eleanor went very still in the doorway, one hand pressed flat against the frame, as the words rearranged themselves in her mind with sickening slowness. "Gabriel. Not Grey, Gabriel." She pushed the door open before she had decided to, and found Julian Farrow and Mr. Grey. Mr. Grey, standing in his plain dark coat, his grey eyes finding hers across the small room, with an expression she would spend a long time afterward trying to name. Frozen, in the particular silence of men, caught precisely where they should not be. "Eleanor," he began. "You are not a secretary," she said, and her voice, to her own surprise, came out steady, though everything within her had begun, quietly, to fall apart. "No," he said, "I am not." "Then who?" she said, though some cold, clear part of her had already understood, had already assembled the truth from 100 small details she had let herself overlook, because the alternative had been too painful to consider. "Who exactly have I been speaking with, Your Grace, these past 2 weeks?" The title landed in the small room like a struck bell. "Let me explain," Gabriel said, taking a step toward her. "Please don't." She stepped back, one hand pressed to her mouth, as though to hold in something that threatened to break loose. "Please, don't touch me. Don't. I need a moment to understand what has been done to me." "Nothing was done to you," he said, low, urgent. "Eleanor, everything I said to you, everything I felt was observed," she said, and now her voice did shake, "was watched and studied and, what, tested. Was that what I was to you these 2 weeks, Your Grace? A specimen for your amusement, a poor relation to be examined for her honesty, because you did not trust the honesty of women in silk. That is not. I told you things I have told no one," she said, and the tears came now, hot and furious. "I told you about my father, about being unwanted. I danced with you tonight believing you were nothing, no one, a man with no more claim upon this world than I had. And that was why I could—" She stopped, unable to finish, because finishing meant admitting how much she had let herself hope, and hope now felt like the cruelest joke of all. "It was never a game to me," Gabriel said, and something raw broke through his careful composure at last. "I began it as caution. I confess that freely. I have been deceived before, Eleanor, by a woman who valued my title above every other part of me, and I came here meaning only to watch, to be certain, before I let myself be known." "I did not expect, you did not expect to enjoy deceiving me," she said bitterly. "How fortunate for you that it proved so pleasant." "I did not expect to fall in love with you," he said, quiet and final, and the words hung in the air between them, undeniable, and in that moment, entirely unwelcome. Eleanor looked at him for one long, aching moment, at the grey eyes that had watched her so carefully these 2 weeks, that she had believed, foolishly, belonged to a man as unremarkable and unguarded as herself, and felt something in her chest crack cleanly in two. "I don't believe you," she said, though some traitorous part of her wanted, desperately, to believe him. "I don't believe a duke falls in love with a poor companion in a borrowed gown. I believe a duke amuses himself, and then returns to London, and the poor companion is left to explain to a household that already despises her why she made such a fool of herself over a servant who was never a servant at all." She turned and left before he could answer, before Julian Farrow's low, urgent voice could call her back, before the tears blurring her vision could betray her fully in front of either man, and she did not stop walking until she reached the small, cold room at the top of the house that had been hers for 11 years, where she sat upon the narrow bed and wept until there was nothing left to weep, for a happiness she had never truly been permitted to hold, and a trust that had been, however gently, however unwillingly, betrayed. She did not come down the next morning, nor the morning after that. She sent word, through the housekeeper, that she was unwell, and Lady Vane, occupied entirely with the far more urgent business of Cecilia's future, accepted the excuse without particular scrutiny, glad enough to have one less complication underfoot, while the true business of the visit reached its critical hour. Gabriel, for his part, found himself in a position he had not anticipated when he first devised the plan of disguise, that of a man whose deception had succeeded exactly as intended, and had cost him, in the process, the one thing he had not known he wanted until it was nearly lost. "You must tell her the whole truth," Julian said, on the second morning, finding him standing at the window of their shared chamber, watching rain streak the glass. "Not merely who you are, why you did it, what she has meant to you since. She deserves the full accounting, Gabriel, not fragments offered in a moment of panic." "She will not see me," Gabriel said. "I sent a note yesterday. It was returned unopened." "Then you must find another way to be heard," Julian said, "because I did not agree to play a false duke for a fortnight, only to watch you lose the one honest thing this whole miserable charade produced." Gabriel turned from the window, something resolving in him, the particular clarity that comes to a man who has spent 2 years guarding his heart so carefully that he has forgotten what it costs to risk it, and finds, now that the risk has been taken and nearly lost, that guarding it was never worth what it protected him from feeling. "I will need your help," he said, "and I believe I will need to reveal myself properly, not merely to her, but to this entire house, before the day is out. It was Lady Vane's cruelty, in the end, that forced the reckoning sooner than Gabriel had planned. Eleanor, summoned that same afternoon to her aunt's private sitting room, found Lady Vane waiting with an expression of cold, satisfied purpose that made her stomach drop before a single word was spoken. "I have arranged your future, Eleanor," Lady Vane said without preamble. "You are to leave for Yorkshire within the week, to your great-aunt Prudence. I have already written ahead. She has need of a companion since her last one married, and you have proven yourself, this fortnight, entirely too susceptible to notions above your station to remain usefully in this house. Aunt, you will not argue with me. I have indulged your presence here for 11 years out of Christian duty, and I will not see that duty repaid with scandal, dancing with servants, and weeping in your room like a jilted bride when you were promised nothing at all. You will go to Yorkshire, and you will be grateful for the place, and you will not speak of this again." Eleanor stood very still, feeling the walls of her small, careful life close in entirely. The last door, it seemed, shutting with a finality she had feared since childhood and had never quite believed would truly come. She thought of the chapel, the library, the moment on the dance floor when she had, for 3 whole minutes, believed herself worth looking at. She thought of grey eyes and a voice that had told her grief was not indelicate, and she felt something harden in her that was not quite courage yet, but was, perhaps, its early and necessary cousin. "I will not apologize," she said quietly, "for a fortnight in which I was, for the first time in 11 years, treated as though my thoughts were worth hearing. If that is a crime deserving of Yorkshire, Aunt, then I confess it freely, and I go without shame." Lady Vane's face flushed with fury at the quiet defiance, but before she could answer, the door opened without knock or ceremony, and Sir Reginald entered, pale and shaking, a letter clutched in his hand, followed a moment later by Julian Farrow, no longer wearing the borrowed poise of a duke, but standing instead with the easy deference of a man returning gladly to his own proper rank, and, behind him, Gabriel Ashworth, dressed now in a coat that declared, unmistakably, precisely who he was. "Forgive the intrusion," Gabriel said, and his voice, though quiet, carried the particular authority of a man used to being obeyed, an authority Eleanor had never once heard him use in their private hours together. "But I find I have a confession to make to this household, and I would rather it be heard plainly than left to gossip. Your Grace," Sir Reginald began, bewildered, looking between Julian and Gabriel as understanding dawned slowly and painfully across his face. "I am the Duke of Rothmere," Gabriel said. "This gentleman, my dear friend Lord Farrow, has done me the very great favor these 2 weeks of standing in my place, at my own request, so that I might observe this household as an ordinary man, and learn what I could not otherwise have learned as a duke, namely, whether the warmth I was shown was given to me, or merely to my title." Lady Vane's face had gone the color of ash. Cecilia, drawn by the commotion, stood frozen in the doorway, her carefully rehearsed composure entirely abandoned. "I found," Gabriel continued, and now, for the first time, he looked directly at Eleanor, and his voice, though it did not falter before the room, softened unmistakably as it turned to her, "that in this house, only one person offered me kindness, with no thought of what it might purchase her. Only one person spoke to me honestly, of grief and loneliness and hope, believing I was nothing more than a secretary, with no fortune to recommend him. Miss Hartley owes this family no apology for a fortnight of honesty. If any apology is owed, it is mine to give, for allowing my own caution to cost her the trust she deserved from the very beginning." The room was utterly silent. Eleanor stood very still, her heart hammering, scarcely able to credit what she was hearing. "Your Grace," Lady Vane began, her voice suddenly sickeningly conciliatory, "I am certain Eleanor did not mean—" "I did not come to hear your certainty, madam," Gabriel said, and something cold entered his voice for the first time. "Having watched, these 2 weeks, precisely how this household treats a young woman who has given it 11 years of loyal, unpaid service. I understand there was some talk, only this morning, of sending Miss Hartley to Yorkshire. I would ask that talk be abandoned entirely. Of course, Your Grace, if that is your wish. It is not merely my wish, Gabriel said. It is, I hope, about to become considerably more than that, if Miss Hartley will permit me a private word. Every eye in the room turned to Eleanor, who felt the weight of all of them. Her aunt's fury, her cousin's shock, her uncle's bewildered calculation, already turning toward what this reversal might mean for the family's fortunes, and found, beneath all of it, only Gabriel's grey eyes, steady and searching, and, for the first time since she had known him, entirely unguarded. I do not know, she said quietly, to him alone, though the room heard every word, whether I can trust anything you tell me now, Your Grace, when I did not know enough to trust what you told me before. Then let me earn that trust properly, he said, not with a title and not with a fortune, but with time and honesty, for as long as you will permit me to offer it. I do not ask you to forgive the deception today. I ask only that you allow me the chance to prove, over whatever time you require, that what grew between us in that library, in that chapel, on that dance floor, was never an experiment. It was the truest thing I have felt in 2 years of guarding myself against exactly the kind of hurt I have now, however unwillingly, caused you. Eleanor felt the tears rise again, though these were different from the ones she had wept alone in her narrow bed. Less bitter, though no less overwhelming. I need time, she said finally, quietly. Not to punish you, only because I find I no longer know how to trust my own heart, when it has already been so thoroughly surprised once. Then take whatever time you need, Gabriel said, and know that I will not spend it in London, nor anywhere else, but here, for as long as it takes, proving that my patience is equal to my regard. He kept his word. He did not press her in the days that followed, though he remained at Ashcombe Manor under his own name now, much to Lady Vane's flustered, transparent attempts to redirect her ambitions from Cecilia toward damage control of an entirely different kind. He sought Eleanor out gently, in small ways rather than grand gestures, a book left where she would find it, a quiet word of concern when he noticed her tired from a sleepless night, an offer of company on her walks that she was free, and knew herself free to refuse. She did refuse, more than once in the first days. But she found, gradually, that his patience did not waver, that he asked nothing of her she was not ready to give, and that the man beneath the title remained, in every essential way she could discern, exactly the man who had held an umbrella's worth of shelter for a stranger's horse, and told her, in a moonlit garden, that her grief was not indelicate. It was in the chapel, nearly a fortnight after the revelation, that she finally came to him. I have thought a great deal, she said, sitting beside him in the quiet pew, about what it means to be seen truly, rather than merely looked at. I think, for most of my life, I believed the two were the same thing. You taught me they are not. And what have you concluded? He asked, careful not to reach for her, though she could see the restraint costing him something. That I was seen, by you, before I ever knew who was doing the seeing, she said, and that the seeing was real, whatever name or title was attached to it. I have decided that matters to me more than the deception that surrounded it. Eleanor, I am not finished, she said, with the ghost of her old dry humor returning. I have also decided that I will not marry a duke, merely because a duke has asked prettily and proven patient. I will only marry a man who continues, for the whole of our lives, to see me as plainly and honestly as he did in that first fortnight, disguise or no disguise. Can you promise me that, Your Grace? I can promise you better than a promise, he said, and finally, carefully, took her hand. I can promise you a lifetime of proving it, one honest day at a time, for as long as you will have me. She smiled, the real smile, unpracticed, that he had first glimpsed in the rain by the stables, and let him draw her closer, and in the quiet of that small chapel, with no audience but old stone and fading light, Gabriel Ashworth, Duke of Rothmere, kissed Eleanor Hartley as though she were the only truth he had ever needed to find. The wedding, when it came in the early spring, was neither so grand as Lady Vane might once have wished for Cecilia, nor so quiet as Eleanor's 11 years of invisibility might once have suggested she deserved. It was, instead, exactly as it should have been, full of the people who had truly seen her, however few they numbered, and entirely absent the performance she had spent so long standing at the edges of. Lady Vane attended, chastened and careful, no longer quite so certain of who in a room deserved her attention, and who did not. Cecilia, to her credit, had found in the aftermath a rueful honesty of her own, and offered Eleanor, on the morning of the wedding, an apology as unpracticed and real as anything Eleanor had heard from her in years. Julian Farrow stood as groomsman, delighted beyond measure to have played, for one memorable fortnight, a duke he was heartily glad to relinquish back to its rightful and considerably more besotted owner. And Eleanor Hartley, who had once believed herself furniture in every room she entered, walked down the aisle of the small stone chapel where she had first begun to understand the difference between being looked at and being truly known, toward a man who had watched her from the very beginning, not for what she might offer him, but for exactly who she already was. She had believed, for 11 long years, that no one had noticed her. She had been wrong from the very first rainy evening, though it would take a duke's disguise, a broken trust mended with patience, and a heart braver than she knew she possessed, to finally let herself believe it. Some hearts, she thought, as Gabriel lifted her hand to his lips before the small gathered crowd, are not won by grand declarations at all. They are won quietly, over weeks of honest attention, by someone patient enough to wait until the truth could stand entirely on its own, needing no title, no fortune, no disguise at all, to finally be believed.